feel as if I've spent quite a lot of time in the last 5 years since I've been elected bemoaning the stampeding of banks out of our communities without so much as a backward glance. Now, my constituency, North Ayrshire and Arran, has several towns where there is no bank at all, and we've heard other members talking about that. Ardrossan, Stevenston, Kilwinning. Kilwinning's a town of 21,000 people. West Kilbride, Dalry, Beath, all without a bank. And Kilbirnie. Kilbirnie's last bank has had its opening hours reduced, and that is the only bank left in the entire Garnock Valley, which is 3 distinct towns with a collective population of more than 19,000 people. So losing the last bank in our towns is a severe blow to our communities and undermine the commercial sustainability of the communities, alongside, of course, having significant social impact. And we've heard much about that today. So, as every other member has said who's spoken today, I can also say that my constituency has been particularly hard hit, and I share all the concerns expressed by the honourable member for Midlothian. In Scotland, we have lost more than a third of our bank branches since 2015, according to research. In fact, Which, the consumer organisation, found that banks shut 396 Scottish branches between January 2015 and August 2019, reducing the number by 38%. And that, by any measure, is quite an alarming rate of closure. Sure. So, we've heard that the honourable member for Midlothian, the member for East Renfrewshire, the member for Kilmarnock and Loudon, and the member for Strangford are all saying similar things in that regard. And it's clear, as we've heard from the member for East Renfrewshire, it's clear that any consultations that take place are simply window dressing. They're simply tick-box exercises so that the bank can reassure themselves and reassure the Minister, oh yes, Minister, we have undertaken consultation, when we know that actually isn't true in reality. But I remember the same thing happened in 2007 and 2008, where in my constituency there was mass post office closures. And perhaps naively and perhaps even innocently, long before I was elected to this place, I, along with other party activists in the SNP, we had street stalls, we went door to door with petitions, we did everything we could to move the post office to reverse these closures. And of course, nothing changed because the consultations weren't really meaningful at all. So we have memories of this from other times. Minister, what I would say to you is this has to stop. The Treasury Committee concluded that, and I quote, "There are still large sections of society who rely on bank branches to carry out their banking needs. A bank branch network, or at least a face-to-face banking solution, is still a vital component of the financial services sector and must be preserved." Now, I know the Minister probably will not agree, but I genuinely believe that because there was no UK intervention, and I've said this to the Minister before in one of the countless debates I've participated on this, because there was no government intervention when RBS announced its radical programme of closures, although we owned significant stake in RBS as taxpayers, when they announced these significant eye-watering closure programmes, the fact that nothing was done, I believe, emboldened the other banks, those of which there is no element of public ownership. Because if a publicly owned bank can do it, why can't a private bank do it without any kickback or repercussions from those in the corridors of power? But if the government, as they have demonstrated that they are so willing to accept closures of branches, banks which they owned in terms of RBS, that's extremely disappointing. And throughout that entire closure programme that we've witnessed with RBS, I listened very, very hard, but I couldn't hear anybody in government condemning these closures. All I heard was a distancing of any sense of responsibility, which is really disappointing for our constituents. So it seems that other banks felt that they could employ the same tactics and just close down wherever they felt it was inconvenient to have a branch anymore without any consequences or any official condemnation from government. And as a result, the people who pay the price are the people in our communities who are suffering for want of a bank and will continue to suffer for want of a bank. And we've heard a lot about that today. And of course, we've got these, these mobile banks, which are really not sufficient, really not answering the question about what we do without a bank. They're not disability compliant, their reliability is questionable at best, and they simply don't fit the bill and take the place of a bank. And we know that the gaps left by banks, and we've heard today, the gaps left by banks cannot properly be filled by post offices. And that's no reflection on post offices who work hard to provide a good service to our communities. But post offices are not banks, and they cannot fill the gap. And the Treasury Committee, of course, as the Minister will know, concluded that post offices, and I quote, should not be seen as a replacement for a branch network, but as a complementary proposition. And we've heard other members talking about the fact that post offices simply can't cover that gap. And along with bank branch closures, we're witnessing the demise of free cash machines, as we've heard today. We see around 10 free-to-use ATMs being shut down every week in the last year. And the Treasury, as far as I can make out, and I hope the Minister can contradict me, the Treasury seems to have been deaf for all pleas to government intervention in that regard as well, to protect free cash. And I hope the Minister is able to offer some comfort about that today. Well, I look forward to hearing the Minister who's speaking from a sedentary position. The ATM Industry Association has warned that 1/5 of Scotland's free ATMs will start charging consumers in the next year, which can only be seen as a cynical move to force us to become a cashless society. And picking up what's been touched on by the member for Kilmarnock and Loudon and Renfrewshire East, bank closures, and also the member for Strangford and Midlothian, bank closures have, as we now know, the game's up. They've been a tool to force people to bank online. So as banks have been quietly cutting the fees they are willing to pay machine operators to provide bank customers with access to cash, they're also forcing us to go cashless and online. Banks are attempting to put pressure on customers who are not acting in the way that they, the banks, find convenient. What happened to the customer being king? Going cashless and banking online, as we've heard, may be the preferred option for some, and good luck to those for whom it is the preferred option. But some of us do not wish to go down that route, and there's an increasingly aggressive efforts employed to do so, at quite breakneck speed, I have to say. I, and those of my constituents who do not favour these options, will not be forced to bank online. And we will not be bullied into doing so, and we will not be bullied into going cashless. And it's come to a rum-do, Mr Chair, when the service provider is bullying the customer, because that's how it feels. In any case, even customers who perhaps may be interested in banking online, some of them are simply not able to do so for a variety of reasons that the Minister will understand, and at which the Honourable Member for Strangford reminded us. But regarding online banking, I have corresponded with the Treasury about this in the past, and the Treasury accepted that broadband access is not yet good enough for everyone to rely on digital banking. The Government and the Access to Banking Standards must ensure that banks have a social responsibility to provide banking facilities to all our towns. Such services could be provided relatively easily through the widely rolling out of banking hubs. Indeed, I met the Minister where he sits. I met the Minister to discuss this very issue last year, so I'm hoping, I'm quite excited about the fact that he'll be able to update me on progress with that. But I can't see any discernible obstacle to that option, except, and I'm sure the Minister will correct me if he thinks I'm wrong, the only obstacle I can see is perhaps a lack of political will and indeed the arrogance and intransigence of the banking industry. Our communities and our constituents deserve better than they've had up to this point. Banks have to face up to their social responsibilities, get their heads together and create banking hubs in our towns right across the board. And there's no real impediment to do that. So I urge the Minister to use his good offices to bang some banking heads together and ensure that their customers' voices are heard. The Government does have a role to play when the last bank in town is closed. The Government has said repeatedly that these are commercial decisions. But this is not just a commercial matter. This is about social responsibility. This is about financial inclusion. And I urge the Minister to reflect further on the strong feelings and concerns expressed today. Will he finally bring forward legislative proposals to ensure that our banks live up to their responsibilities to our communities?